What is Stylify CSS? In this video, I'm gonna explain what is Stylify CSS, what are the features, how to bundle CSS files, and how to integrate Stylify into Nuxt, Astro, Vite, and other tools. In CSS, when we want to change a color to blue, we are going to write color blue into the CSS file. In Stylify, you can write color blue into the class attribute of an element where the class should be applied. Each selector written this way is generated as an utility. When we need this selector somewhere else in the application, if it is in the one bundle, it is reused, it is not generated again. Selectors are also generated only when they are matched within a file content. So if you write a selector like color blue and then remove it, the CSS will be removed with it. Because of this, you don't need any purge CSS, any tool that is cleaning the CSS, anything that actually checks if the classes you have in a class attribute are used or not. For a selector that requires margin 0 auto or a selector that requires a quote, you can use an underscore instead of a space and a head character instead of a quote. When you need a pseudo class like Hoover, you can put the class before the selector. It's going to be Hoover color blue and the CSS is going to be generated as it should be. For responsive design, you can use dynamic and static screens. Static screens are those you may know from other frameworks like small, medium, large. Static screens has fixed values like 640 pixels. Dynamic screens, on the other hand, has dynamic values. It is a regular expression that matches a screen within a selector, and the value that is matched is used within the media. It can be, for example, a min width 640 pixels, but also 641 for 642. It can be max width 400 pixels. It can be very flexible and it can be used for those screens that are not defined by default. Screens can be also combined using logical operands. There are operands for and or. It can be, for example, a large or landscape, and then you can apply some rules. Now, you might be wondering, why to use these selectors? Why not use some abstractions, some shortcuts, some shorter selectors instead of those that are in the CSS? There are actually several reasons for that. First of them is that we all need CSS to style our website. We all know the syntax, but instead of writing, for example, a color blue into the CSS, we are going into the framework and we are going to search for the correct shortcut. With Stylify, you don't have to do this. You are going to write exactly the same syntax, almost the same, like in the pure CSS. Another reason is that shortcuts and random named classes are not self-explanatory. If we take selectors like font large or padding 2, we have no idea what the value actually means. For example, for the font, is it a small text, is it around 12 pixels, or is it a huge text around 64 pixels? For the padding 2, is it padding 20 pixels, 40 pixels, 2 blocks? What does it even mean? It simply doesn't mean anything. CSS selectors may be long, but you actually know what they mean. If it is a font size, then it is a font size in the CSS. If it is a margin left, then it is gonna be margin left in the CSS. There is no difference between that. Next important reason is that what if we have a shortcut, for example, a shrink for flex, and the browsers in the future come with something like a shrink property in the CSS. If you have it in a file and it is for flexbox, but in the future it will be working somehow differently. It will be for shrinking some, I don't know, blocks, for example. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to have a BC break in the code, or are you going to some random name classes like blocks shrink that actually doesn't even exist in a CSS? To avoid hard-coded values within a code like font size 24 pixels or some hexadecimal colors, we can use variables. Variables can be defined on two places. They can be defined in a global config, in, for example, Nuxt config for Stylify, or in a bundler config, or within a file, within a comment. When defining variable within a comment, it is in a Stylify tags within the comments. The reason why Stylify uses comments is that comments works with almost in any file format, in almost any framework. If it is Vue, if it is React, if it is PHP, it simply works everywhere. Within the template, it expects an object that doesn't have surrounding brackets. If you want to use the defined variables somewhere else in the application, you can actually enable injecting them into the CSS. If you have, for example, a style for a button and you want to use it somewhere else, we can define a component. Components can be defined in the same way like variables. They can be defined in a file or in a global config. To optimize the CSS output, the generated components are attached to utilities. Therefore, there are no duplicates in property CSS and values. Also, in case you run production bundle and you allow mangling selectors, the selectors are rewrite within the files and also are shrinked within the CSS. There is a similar mechanism like medium.com uses, and it works pretty well. If we want to style some element indirectly, like a child element, we can use custom selectors. Custom selectors can be written directly in a class attribute, or they can be configured in a command or in a global config. Each of these configuration options have its benefits and some cons. When we, for example, need to style elements that are within a file only within one, it is good to use the command because you are not bloating the global configuration. Otherwise, if you are styling, for example, a border box for all elements in the page, put it into the global config. Whenever configuring a custom selector outside of the class attribute, we can use similar syntax that is in the CSS. Stylify allows you to nest the selectors inside one selector and chain them. This, you can write the CSS on one place and it is kinda short. Stylify also has its own bundler. With this bundler, you can configure how many CSS bundles you want, and you can generate CSS for each file, for each component, for each layout you have. You can use direct paths to files, to the input files, or you can write masks. The output file is, however, always one single path. When the bundler reads the file content, it tries to process the file options. Bundler have Stylify files, and when there are some files within these Stylify tags, it takes them and it tries to find each file defined in this option. It can map all the components and it can map even nested components. So with this, you can define a bundle for a page and map all components and don't have to generate CSS for each component separately. Thanks to that, you have one bundle for page, one bundle for layout, and you are ready to go. And now finally, integrations. To speed the integration, Stylify provides modules, plugins, and integrations for Nuxt, Astro, Vite, Webpack, ASBuild, and Rollup. Each plugin, integration, and module doesn't expect any configuration. It is completely optional. When you take a look on the Nuxt integration, it is all about adding the Stylify Nuxt module. When you take a look on the Astro integration, it is the same. The configuration is optional and is all about adding one plugin. Whenever using an integration or plugin, Stylify tries to detect the environment, if it is production or dev, and decides whether to mangle or rewrite the selectors. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I will be happy for any feedback. If you like the video, hit the subscribe button and see you in the next video.